So we will start with my splice. So my splice is supposed to it's supposed to mimic the actual splice function, right? Now, if you guys read documentation on splice, it says that the delete count is optional, and if it's not passed in, then you should delete everything in the array, okay? Past the starting point. However, that is not part of the problem, so we have to give in like a 0 and have to take into that account, okay? Is everyone clear on that? I realize I did not speak correctly at all just then. But no, basically, like in real splice, if you just say my splice index 1, you know, it'll just remove everything after index 1 because you don't pass in a count, you know? So this problem that you had to do in the workshop, you did not have to take into the account if that delete count was passed in or not, but you did have to take into the account if it was 0. So that's what I'm saying. It being 0 and it being passed and not being passed in is different. So I'm just saying you guys did not have to take that into account. Okay. So what this does take in though is an array, and it does take in a start, a delete. Well, I'll just say a count. I'm gonna move this over. A count, and then a new value, possibly, right? Because you can also add things into this. So when you guys are actually using the real splice, it might be confusing, right? Because splice is kind of confusing how it does, especially since it mutates the original array. But I feel like going in order for like what to do with this function is when writing it from scratch actually wasn't too difficult, right? So we know that splice has to return the removed elements, right? As a separate array. So we know we have to store those elements in some kind of array. And we do know we have to mutate the array, right? So I'm thinking right off the bat that we can just have 2 arrays, what to keep and what to delete, right? And then we can take everything out of this array by popping it out or something, and then pushing everything into the array that we want to keep back into the original array, and then just returning the array of things we wanted to delete. Because that's essentially what splice is doing, right? But we also have to add things if new value exists. So what do we do? First, we can just say let removed equal empty array, and let kept equal empty array. And now we can do a for loop. And we could say for let I equals 0, I is less than start, I plus plus. And here we could just say kept dot push array at I. So what am I doing here? What I'm doing here is basically saying I'm going to start at the beginning of the array, and I don't know what start is, but start is required. You need to pass in a place to start for splice to work, so that's required. So I know this is a number. Even if it's at 0, that means that this will never run, okay? So we will start at 0 and go up until this point, because everything before where you want to start is going to be the same, right? So we want to keep all those elements. So that's just the first thing we can do, right? Then the weird thing happens is when we get to start. Now that we're at start, right? We break out of the loop, and what is a logical thing that we want to do? Right after we stop and we put everything in, what do we want to do? We want to check and see if this exists. And if it does, we want to push that into kept. Put it there, because that's where you insert things in splice, right? Is everyone following me so far? Okay. So basically, we can say if new value is not equal to undefined, because we can't just say if this in this case. We can't do this because what if the thing, because I always think of 0, right? Like 0 is like a number. It's a valid number, but it's falsy. So if we were trying to put 0 into this array, it wouldn't run, right? But that's like a real value. But undefined isn't. Undefined is like a mistake, right? And undefined is what parameters are if they are not passed in as arguments, okay? So we say if that's not equal to undefined, that means it has something. We could do kept.push new value. Does everyone understand? Also, in the real splice, you can add multiple things, but we are only handling one thing, okay? Does this make sense? Yeah.
Trying to have it make sense, but wouldn't you? So this is you've done that outside of the for loop.
After the for loop.
After the for loop, so okay. So I guess what it's doing is you're pushing in all the elements up to the start one, and then that automatically makes it understand that the next thing you do is push the.
Because the start is an index, right? Starting at that index, that thing is going to be gone. That will be deleted up until whatever the count is. Then in place of that, where we started deleting from, that is where new value is supposed to go. We put it in. Splice is really for inserting things into the middle of an array, which is what we're doing here. So if we loop from the start of the array, the beginning index, up until where the delete start count is supposed to happen, that means we have everything up until that point. So before we even remove everything, I mean, we're only dealing with these arrays, right? We're not dealing with we're not dealing with this yet. We're not actually doing anything to this. We're just taking those elements and putting it in kept. So kept is something that we will be replacing this with later. But to get everything out of here, first we get up to the start, and then we put this new value there. Then we can worry about taking those things, not actually out of array right now, but not putting them into kept programmatically. Yeah.
Why would you not put the if statement under for loop?
It is under the for loop.
Oh.
This closes here. For loop runs.
Inside of
Because then we would add this however many times. Do you know?
Yeah.
Like if start was like the second to last thing, and you wanted to add one thing there, every time we would loop through the beginning, you would just add it and add it and add it and add it and add it. So it'd be all in between, you know? Any other questions? Make sense? Cool. So now that we have that, we want to do a for loop where we're going to start at start, and we are going to take everything there and put it in removed. Because we know what we need to remove, right? And we know where we need to start, at the start. And we know how long we need to go. The count, right? The count is how many things we are actually removing. So we can do, let me move up a little bit. So we can do for let I equal start. I is less than start plus count, right? Because that's how long we want this loop to go. We want to start where the start is, and we want to go until it's start plus count, right? So, and we want to hit every element, so we do I plus plus. Then we could just say removed dot push array at I. So now, in this for loop, right? In this for loop right here, this removed array will be whatever it is that we are deleting, starting from the start index, and it will have however many this count is, right? Does anyone disagree?
My only question is, I know that it's a different for loop, but is it okay to be reusing I in this moment?
Yes, because of scope.
Right. Okay.
When you define things inside of a for loop, like declaration, this I is only accessible to things inside of here and down, right? Outside, like this for loop is defined in this splice's function scope, right? And so is this one. But this for loop can't have access to anything defined inside of this for loop, right? If I try to console log I out here, it'd be undefined. If I use j here and I try to console log I over here, it would be undefined.
Let's say just for like, I don't know, keeping your brain straight, you wanted to make the second one J. Like, is that like weaker coding?
No. You could do whatever you want. Do you want me to make a j?
No, it's fine.
Do you want me to make a j? I'll make a j.
Sure.
So you don't have to?
Huh? No. You do not have to change. If you were doing a double for loop, if I put this for loop inside of here, which really no one should be doing unless you really need to, but then this would have to change if this was in here.
Okay.
You know, like when you were doing the grids, like grid at I at j, like grid at I is referencing the same. Both i's would be the same inner for loop because when JavaScript is looking for what a variable is defined as, it looks at the innermost scope first before it looks out. Yeah. So this will be put into the removed array, right? So then, now we need to add the remaining elements to this. But we want to skip over everything that's in removed, right? We want to skip over everything. So what we can do is we could just write another for loop, let k equal start plus count, because that's where we left off before, right? And we want to start after this. Do you see how this is all kind of in order? We go from 0 up until start. Then we go from start up until start plus count. Then we go from start plus count to the end, okay? And that is all we need to do. K is less than array.length. K plus plus. So then we do kept.push array at k. So now everything should be in order. Array of k should be the mutated array, and then what is the other one called? Removed should be the thing that we return. So right away I could just down here real quick, since I know that this is what I've got, I could just do return removed. Okay? Because that's what we're going to be doing. However, splice mutates the original array, so we have to actually do something to do this, right? So we can just while, this is like a really quick way, array.length, array.pop. That takes everything out. Okay? This is going to take everything out of the array. Then we can do another for loop for let m equal 0. M is less than kept.length. M plus plus array dot push kept of m. And it's that simple. Yeah.
So where you put the while loop, when you were popping all the original elements out of the original array,
Yeah.
I did a for loop, and I set I to 0, I less than original array dot length. And for some reason that wouldn't work unless I set the middle part to I equals original array dot length. Like, shouldn't it work though, because it's going from 0 to dot length?
Wait, what is your for loop trying to do?
Removing all the elements from the original array. So without popping.
So, without the while loop.
Yeah,
With
so
a for loop.
Yeah.
So you did what? What did you set I equal to?
Let I equals 1. I is less than array dot length. I plus plus. And then array dot pop.
Well,
Does that cover all the elements? Well, I said let I equals to 0.
oh, you said I equal to 0?
Yeah.
So like this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And this wouldn't work unless you did what? Unless you did that?
Once I set I equal to array.length. In the middle part.
Oh, here?
No. I like the middle part, like where I is less than. I would have to set it so I equal to. No, it's just one equal sign.
This
Yeah, it
doesn't
would
make
work
any
that
sense.
way. And when it's I less than, it wouldn't remove like the correct elements. It would be 1 apple, like the extra one would still be there. Couldn't figure out why.
What? Oh. One, two, two, three, one. Array dot pop. Put this down here. But this wouldn't work though, right? 1, 2, 1. Array dot pop is 1. And I'm getting 2. One. Here.
Yeah, like that extra one is still there.
Hmm.
And like when I set the middle part to I equals to array.length, I could even change that I equals to 1, and it would still work.
What the hell?
I didn't really understand my index situation.
So
like the while loop, you're trying to just pop everything out, right?
yeah, so if I don't console log here, oh shit. If I don't console log there, but I console log dot log array here, oh shit.
And I run into the same problem for like the reverse array problem also. So.
Because you don't get this last element out.
Or like the second index, right?
0, 1, and it never reaches 2. Right? It should reach 2, but it never does.
Yeah, but why wouldn't it though? Because
Well, let's walk through it, right? You have I equal to 0, and you have this array, right? 1, 2, 3. Array dot pop. So now the array is 1, 2. Then you increment I, so I is now 1. But the length of the array is now 2. So then this, right? The length of the array is 2, right? This is gone, right? So now you increment I. So now I should be 1, right? So when I is 1, we array dot pop again. This is now a length of 1. So I is 1. 1 is less than this. So this never happens. You see? You break out of the for loop too early. I'm pretty sure if you just did that, like that would fix it, right?
that doesn't work either.
No, it doesn't work either. All right, whatever. But like, that's why, because you're making your condition based off like you're incrementing I, but like the array dot length is constantly changing.
Right.
So I would just like never do that. I wouldn't recommend you to do that. You know?
You don't recommend a for loop in this situation?
Not really, because you're setting I and you're saying, okay, go until this is done,
Right.
and I expect to hit everything. But the whole time I'm modifying that length, right? Whereas this, look how easy this is, right? You just remove everything.
Yeah, you just have to recognize when that length is constantly changing.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just
Oh,
confused
sh-
how it works for the while and not for the for loop.
Well, the while loop is just saying while array dot length, right? So while, that means that while it's a number that isn't 0, basically. We're just gonna pop and pop and pop and pop and pop. Nothing left to pop. Length is 0. Break out of the while loop.
So basically the pop method here is taking the place of the because that itself is.
I guess you can say that. I guess so.
But couldn't you say in a for loop you set an I to 1 and then you say I wouldn't that be the equivalent of
This,
like if you set up I to 1 instead of 0?
if you set I to 1, no, because we don't, yeah.
Okay.
So can you explain one more time when you set I equal to array.length?
Oh, but now wait, hold on. Nice. All right, say that again.
When you change I equal to array.length in the for loop?
Here?
Yeah, so how come like this works and also like, when you change I equal to 0, it also works?
Because, like, I can't even explain to you why this works. Because this middle situation is supposed to be something we're checking.
Right. Yeah.
But this doesn't do anything. This just reassigns I. So I don't even understand why this doesn't throw a reference error, honestly, if I was being completely honest.
Works. So yeah, I couldn't understand that, but yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do something like this, like, ever, you know? I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah.
I put one of those in the code pen, and I got it was like a continuous one, and there was no way to break it situation.
An infinite loop?
Infinitely.
Oh, yeah?
Something like that,
Yeah, I don't really know what's going on over here, honestly, with this code. I'll look into it more, I guess. I don't know. I've never tried to do that.
But in this one, why are you popping everything out of array to begin with? Like going back to just the question at hand.
Because we're hacking this to modify the array. Pop modifies the array, mutates it, right? You have to mutate the array. So we have to take everything out of the array and mutate it. Then we just put everything we want back in.
But so you never took out the first, the beginning of the array is still the same.
Yeah.
You already removed it, so why can't you just push in the rest of it? Like start from your start plus count, and then move forward, just push it in. Like I don't understand why the whole array needs to be dumped.
Because the array has like things in it.
Oh, we never. Okay.
You know, this array has never changed. It's always been the original array, you know?
Okay.
The things that we were doing before, we had to put in here, you know, into these two.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
No, that's all right. Yeah.
So yeah, similar to that from the comment, I was struggling with this problem because I was trying to just work from the original array. Like I didn't think to push it all into this new array and then
Yeah.
So I was trying to see what kind of method to use that would remove an element from the original array without using splice or using slice because that wouldn't.
Oh, you're just looking for another method or something?
Yeah, but I guess so. This is the only way to do it.
It kind of, yeah.
I kind of did it your way, but the way that you're explaining it. I took everything out of the front until start, and then I deleted start to count, and then I pushed in the new value, and then I put everything back in from the beginning. But I didn't make two iterations. I only made one.
Sick.
So I think you're in the right track there. But that looks cleaner than what it is by far.
Do you mind scrolling down to the wild card?
Can you say what a while loop is really good for over a for loop again?
It's just situations like that, right? Sometimes they're just easier to reason about.
Is there some key?
There's no difference. They do the same thing.
Well, not in this case, right? Because you can't.
Well, then this is like a headache. Like there's a way to do this, but
What made you choose while?
What made me choose while?
Yeah.
This is something that like I would just know to do if I wanted to remove everything from an array.
Is it like, would you use a while loop when you don't know the exact place to stop? Whereas for loops, you know the exact place to stop, like there's a set conditional.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I see, like, generally, I always use for loops, but like some things is just like this is just so simple, you know. If we're just checking like one thing and we're like, I don't know, it's just like makes sense to me. I don't know, you know. I mean, we could do it like this with a for loop if we just say like, if we let I equals 0 and while, and we could do that, you know, then it would be the same thing. If we just check array.length, because this is the same thing. This middle section of the for loop is what goes up here, you know. But we don't need like I, like there's no reason for an incrementer. We're not like keeping track and like looking at different indexes. We were just taking everything out, no questions, you know. I think like we don't even need to do this. Does this still work? I don't even know. Yeah. Because these are optional things, right? But like, there's no reason to write things like this, you know? This is just confusing to other people. But yeah, I guess it's interesting if you want to play around. Oh, wait a second. I was doing this the whole time. This might not even work. Aha. But this still does. Yeah. Right? Huh?
So you don't even have to put I in every one of those three conditions, like. You
Oh, that's why. If I was doing this. Yeah, no, you really don't, honestly. Like, if you guys remember the loop lecture that I taught you, so I guess you don't remember, right? 'Cause no one listens to me, right? No, but these things are all optional. This thing, the first thing, happens before the loop starts. Usually it's used to, you could do whatever you want there, but usually it's used to declare, right? A variable, a counter, something that you can increment, okay? Then this will be checked before something starts, right? Before it starts, okay? So if this is falsy immediately, the for loop just doesn't run, right? So this just checks every time, and then at the end of the code, this thing happens, right? The thing to the right. So it's just like, that's just how for loops work, you know? So I feel like some people get into habits of thinking that they're used to specifically loop through arrays, but like they're not. You can use them. This is the same as the while loop. This is literally the same thing. But it's like, why do you need I? What is I for if to remove everything from an array, right? There's like no point. We don't reference anything, you know? That's a good thing. Like, oh, do I need a for loop? Like, do I need I? If you're not using I, then you don't need it. You know. Any questions before I do the reverse array?
This is just a small question. When you like select a variable and then it highlights all the different places in REPL, and then you choose to like update all of them in one motion.
Oh, like if I wanted to change this to I.
Yeah. How do you do that?
On a Mac, it's Command D, and it just goes to everything, and then you could just
You just type over.
you highlight it, and then click Command D, and it goes through everything. You know.
Okay, thank you.
All right, reverse array time. What is this? Okay. So, this just takes an array. So, somebody wanted me to do it the way that the solution video did it, so I will do that, okay? So, if you do like array.reverse, that's a function, that mutates the original array. So that is what we need to do now, right? It's very easy to just take everything from this array and put it in another array, and then return it over there, right? So, what this problem is saying is that we can actually take everything out, put it in an array, and then pop everything out, and then push the thing back into the original array. Kind of what I did with the while loop before, right? It's kind of like a hack. But you can actually do this in place by just switching everything, right? So a way to do this is that we have 2 pointers, one starting at the beginning and one starting at the end of the array. And we do this loop until these are in the middle, right? And then we just swap every time, okay? Until you're in the middle and there's nothing else to do. So you can do this in a for loop like so. Well, first we need to know like what that middle point is, right? Because the arrays are varying in length, right? So I can just do like const middle, and I could say that is going to be equal to math.ceil of array.length divided by 2. I do math.ceil, or you can do math.floor, it doesn't matter, to get a whole number, you know? Because the division doesn't return a whole number, it returns a float if the array's length is odd, right? So, now that I have this middle, right? Now I can write my for loop. I can say for let I, and I could say that is equal to 0, and I could say I is less than middle. So I is just going to go into the middle, right? So I will effectively act as our starting point, the start, right? Then we also need an end. So an easy way to do this, let me just do the plus plus. The plus plus. So an easy way to do this would be const end and set that equal to the r.length minus 1. That will be the last thing, right? The last thing minus I. But if we're subtracting I, how do we get the last element? Because I is first 0. So that means it will be starting at the last element. And when I is incremented to 1, the pointer from the start moves, but then r.length minus 1 minus I, that thing is going to be now subtracted by 1. So it's going to move inwards. So now we have our way to go, right? So now that we have all of these pointers, we can basically just say const left is going to be equal to r. Oh, not r. Just change this to r. R at I. And we're going to have const right, and that's going to be set to r at end, right? So then, now that we have these things in these variables, left and right, we can say r of I is now going to be reassigned to right. And then we can say r of end, is going to be reassigned to left. And then we could just return r. This is actually pretty simple, okay? We have this middle, the middle point, the stopping point for I, right? And I starts at 0. So let me like put an example array up here. Well, I'll put it down here, honestly. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So, basically, the middle will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 divided by 2. So the middle is to the ceiling, rounding up. So the middle will be 3, right? So I is going to start at 0. So I will point at 1. It will loop until it's less than 3 is no longer true. And then inside of the for loop, we define something called end, which is going to be the length 6 minus 1, 5, index 5 would be the last element, minus I, which is 0. So it's still here, right? So you have I at 0 pointing here, and then end at 5 pointing here. Then we just say const left, a variable, is going to copy what is in here, and it's going to put it into left. right? Right, it's going to copy here and put it into right. So now left and right have these values inside of here. Then we just say r at I. Now we're looking at the array, right? We're looking at the array, not these variables anymore. And we're assigning r of I to right, which is what we took out of here. And then and then you assign left to r at end, which is here. So this goes here. They switch, okay? So when I is incremented, I is now looking at 1, and end is now looking at the 5, right? The 2 and the 5. And then these are actually going to be switched, right? So if you console log reverse array of example array, you get 654321. And if there was an odd number, 76543321. Does that make sense? Is this confusing? But if you think slowly about it, it kind of makes sense, right? You have 2 pointers. This is actually like a common method for solving problems, you know, in computer programming. You have 2 pointers, and you just swap, you know? You're just swapping until when you get to the middle, there's either 2 things, so you swap them, or there's 1 thing, and then that's it. You leave it there, right? That is what this is doing. Taking these things out, putting them into these temporary values, and then assigning what is actually in the array the opposite.
Do you mind going over line 45 again, the math.ce?
This is finding the index of the middle of the array.
Okay.
So we have the array.length divided by 2. That's just like half of the length, right?
Yeah.
But since it could be odd, we want to round that, right? So we can use it in our for loop. So rounding, you could do ceil, or you can do floor. Ceil rounds up to the ceiling, and floor rounds down to the floor.
Yes.
And these are methods off of the global math object, which has a lot of crazy methods on it. You want to like look at MDN and look into that a little more.
Not the middle of it.
So the middle of this array would be in the C3.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's what it's doing, right? It's finding that.
Yeah.
Okay. But if it was even, it would just do the.
It would just.
It wouldn't do the float, but it would do the next one, number? Or,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
No, I mean if it's even, it'll be the whole number. If it's odd, it'll be the next whole number.
Oh, okay, got it.
Like if you like console log, like if you like console.log, math.ceil of like 7.5.
Oh,
Shit.
A is capital.
You get 8. I think it's like any decimal though. Yeah, any decimal, it'll just be the next whole number.
Oh, got it.
Can you explain why in the for loop, that last line?
This?
Yeah. Why the left? How come it doesn't get confused?
How come it doesn't get confused?
Yeah, because aren't you changing array I in the line above it to equal right,
Yeah, array at I.
and then array n equals left, but left. Oh, it's because it's
Left was defined up here. Left is now whatever array of I was in that point in time. Done. That's what left is. So when you assign array of I to right over here, left isn't pointing at whatever right was. Left is still pointing at this. What it was then, right? Like, down here, if you have let A equal A, and then you have let B equal A, and then you have let A equal C, I mean not A, let A, and then you reassign that, and you console.log B, this is going to be A, right? Because B was assigned to A when A was A. But then even if I change A to C, A, they're two different things, right? Because they're primitive values, they're copied, right?
So would you be able to do this thing with a complex value?
No.
Do you mind showing your work again for your answer?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, like how do you recommend going about like when you come across something like this? Because that like how do you try figuring it out? I don't know if it's a stupid question, but
Well,
like
this is simply reversing an array, right? This is like a simple problem. There will be far more complex problems that you will encounter later on. However, if you know how to solve this, you recognize the pattern to that solution, right? So what I'm trying to say is it'll come with experience. You do things more and more, you will recognize patterns. This is simple, but this can be used to break down bigger problems, right? Things like these, pointers, right? Think about pointers. That's the key thing. Not like, should I use a for loop, you know? Think about what you actually need to do, right? You actually need 2 pointers and you need to swap them. You need to swap the values there. That's just that. There's no like solid answer to that question. You know what I mean? And this is like these are algorithms, right? They're algorithm type questions, which everyone does need to know in order to get jobs, but not always, okay? Like you can be an amazing front-end engineer and then just be really bad at algorithms and data structures. It happens, you know?
What are you good at if you're good at being a front end engineer?
Like React and like CSS and stuff. Like making the application. Like everyone needs to know like basic algorithms and stuff, but there are more complex like data structures that exist, you know? But like front end work is more you get data from the database in the back end. Like, you know, the server serves you like all your data and you have to mutate it a little bit to make it what the designer wants you to do, you know? So it's that, like, you need to know how to do that, you know? And all this stuff comes with time, though. This all comes with time. It's fine. Any other questions?
Do you do front end or back end stuff?
No, I do front end stuff. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Just to go back to the previous comment, so when we talked about line 51 and 2,
Yeah.
we were saying that R at I is equal to the point of time when love, right, was established at line 50. So
Yes.
the very end, and then it would just count from that point.
Wait, what? At the very end? What do you, like here, right?
Yeah.
Like in this array, right? In this array, when I say const left,
Yeah.
I say I'm declaring a variable left and is going to be equal to r at I, which would be the number 1. So left is the number 1.
Right.
And then I say right is now going to be equal to array at end. And end was 5.
Yeah.
So that means it will be equal to this 6, the number 6, right? So this is now the number 1, and this is the number 6. That's it.
Okay.
No reference to this actual array. R of I, now I'm saying this array at this index, at I now, 0, is now going to be equal to ray,
Okay.
which is just the number 5, the number 6. So whatever was here, we are reassigning it. If you tried to do this with a string, that wouldn't work, because strings are primitive and you cannot mutate them, okay? However, arrays are complex, so you can reassign things at their indexes. That's why this works like this. Any other questions? How do you guys like objects now? When I left you on Monday, everyone hated them. You guys like them now, and they're not that bad, right? You see how methods are super useful? You see how all this stuff is awesome, right? Everything kind of links together. So now I'm going to talk to you about higher order functions. So I think higher order functions isn't that hard of a concept to understand. Basically, functions, what the point of this lecture is, what I want to get across to you guys, is that functions are just like any other data type, okay? They can go in arrays, they can go in objects, as you saw 2 days ago, right? They're methods. They can do whatever, you know? Just like they're not special, just like every other data type. So that means that functions can also return functions. And that means functions can also be passed as parameters to functions, right? So I just want to show you like a really simple example of this. So if I do like const says hello, and I'm going to say return hello there, and then I will say says hello factory, and this is going to take a func and it's going to return that func. Okay? So now if I say let what am I equal to say hello factory of, and then pass in says hello. I don't like how there's plurals and not. Okay. What is this going to be? It's the function says hello, okay? This is fine. This is weird. What I just did serves no purpose. However, I just wanted to show you that I took this function, and this is not even with fat arrows, right? Not even with fat arrows. I don't need that. This is a function. You know? Function. I took that function, and I passed it into this. This function took it as a parameter, and I returned that function. And there it is. What am I? So, what if I invoked what am I? What am I runs, and I get hello there. What am I is says hello, so it returns hello there. Does anyone have any questions on this?
How come return on line 75 return function? How does that know to return says hello instead of says hello factory?
What is func? No, but like, what is this? It's a parameter, right?
Right.
So that means whatever says hello factory, whatever's thrown into here is just going to get returned. And I just decided to throw in a function.
Oh.
Make sense? Any other questions on this?
So what if you were to put the parentheses in, let's say, hello, because you're calling the function, right?
Here?
No, in line 78.
78.
Say home.
Says hello? Here?
Yeah.
What do you mean where to put the parentheses?
Oh, I just, you're calling the function in there, right? Like,
I'm calling this function here? I'm not.
oh, okay.
I'm assigning, what am I, the return value of says hello factory with this entire function passed in, not invoked. So that means that means if I pass this in, this thing is going to get returned. So then what am I effectively becomes says hello. What if I did do this, and then I ran console.log what am I invoked? What would I get? Hello there? No. I would get a crazy reference error. What? Why? Why? Why do I see this error? What is what am I? What am I is says hello factory invoked. Okay? So that means JavaScript's like, we got to figure out what this is. We have to find out what says hello factory returns passed in this. But what am I passing into says hello factory? Says hello invoked. What does says hello? That means we have to find out what says hello invoked returns, right? So that means says hello is being called here, and it returns a string. So that means this is actually a string. So string was actually going to be returned by says hello factory. Func in this case is going to be hello there. You can't invoke a string, and that's why I get this reference error. What am I is not a function. If I just console log what am I down here, oh shit, what the hell? We get hello there. Does everyone understand why that happened?
Kinda like a domino effect,
What do you mean?
like
Bless.
invoking that, but then we're like going into the function, and that's why it spits out the order. So anyway,
It kind of is, yeah.
yeah, right.
Like, whenever JavaScript sees a function being invoked, time basically stops, and we have to see what that function returns. And if this didn't return anything, what would we get? Undefined. Yeah.
Is it more typical to invoke it down there at what am I versus
Here?
yeah?
Like this? And not here?
Right.
What do you mean by typical?
Is it preferred?
Well, it depends on what you're doing, right? Like, if I want this to be a function, then I can't invoke this, right? Like, they're just two different things.
Is there an engineering where you would do that? Where you
Is there what?
Any like engineering where you would actually like do all those things that you just said here?
Like a real scenario?
Yeah, real scenario.
What's up, man? Nice. Anyways, a real scenario. Like everything else, there was always a time and there was always a place. Higher order functions are useful. There's these things called factory functions, which just like spit out things based off of like different parameters. We go over like.
Hi, sorry to interrupt.
Hey.
Hi, I'm Crystal, I'm the Flex program lead.
Hi.
We've got some snacks if you get a chance to take a break.
Oh, okay, cool. Thanks. Nice. Or I'll finish up real quick. So, you guys so basically, what I'm saying is like, higher. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. But if says hello took a parameter, or I would define says hello inside of here, and it mattered on other parameters passed into says hello factory, you would get different functions and different results. So it's like a big chain domino effect, but I don't want to go into that until tomorrow, okay? If that's okay. Because this is actually more complex than just this, you know? But there is one more thing I wanted to show you guys before I go into the slides, okay? So, and it kind of builds off of this, and it involves another method, all right? An array method that I want to show you guys. It's called for each. For each is actually kind of dope, honestly. I'm not going to lie. So, like, do you guys remember... One sec. Do you guys remember this? You guys remember the leak characters? Do you guys remember that you had to make a dictionary, right? No. You had to make a dictionary and basically key value pairs, right? And you did that by looping, right? There is a way to do this without looping, okay? And it is using for each. And I will show you now, and I will explain what happens along the way. It's going to look weird. But basically, you would do letters dot for each invoke. For each is an array method, right? For each, what for each takes is a function. You must pass a function into for each. When you pass a function into another function, that function is known as a callback. This is important lingo, okay? They are called callbacks. So what for each takes is a callback, okay? And what for each does, so if I just wanted to write a function like this, what for each does for you is that whatever function, like I'm going to write all of the logic in here, inside, right? But what for each does for you is it passes your function two things. One thing you need to take account for, and it is the current element, right? So I will call that letter, because these are all going to be letters, right? And it also passes down the current index of that letter, okay? Into the function that I am creating. For each is doing this for me, okay? And then here, I can say dictionary at letter is going to be equal to leet cars at I. So now, if I console.log dictionary, we get our dictionary. And it's happened in 3 lines of code using for each, okay? So, however, I do want to make everyone aware of something. What if I said return letter? What if I did this? And then I said let what am I equal to this, right? Equal to this whole thing. And we're going to return letter from for each. What do you guys think what am I will be? What do you think it's going to be? It's going to be undefined. Because for each returns nothing. For each doesn't do anything, doesn't return anything, okay? What it does is it basically takes your callback, it takes the function you're passing into it, and calls it on every single element in the array. It does that for you, and it passes in that element that's there and its current index. That's all it does. So this is very useful. Like returning does nothing, setting this equal to this does nothing. This is garbage. But it is useful for modifying other data, right? This is very clean and very sleek. For each, I think, is tricky for beginners to get the hang of using, okay? Because this is the first time you're seeing callbacks, right? This is the first time you're passing functions into functions. But basically what it's doing is it's going through all of the letters, taking this function and calling it on every single one. And the letter will be that letter at that point in time, and the I will be that index at that indexing point in time. You don't actually need this though. This is optional. But I'm choosing to take advantage of that because so I can access leak characters at that index.
instead of doing a for loop,
Yes.
instead of like having to set I and run through each one, this is doing.
Yes. Does that make sense? All right. I guess I'll go into the slides now, unless anyone has any other questions. Anyone want me to do something? All right. So higher order functions. So we're just going to talk about why functions are special, passing functions into other functions, which makes them callbacks, and then for each. So functions are special in JavaScript because they really aren't. We think of functions as being different from other values, like strings, numbers, and arrays. We're used to passing them into functions and returning them from functions, right? But functions sometimes seem like they're different in a different category, rooted in the line of code where they're defined. But in JavaScript, functions are first-class objects, okay? Which is another way of saying that functions are like any other value in JavaScript, okay? First-class objects. Don't worry about that lingo too much, but basically first-class objects mean that it can be passed and returned from functions. That's what it means. Whereas in like a lower level language like C, I think functions are considered second-class objects because you cannot do that in C, okay? But you can do that in JavaScript, which makes them first-class functions, objects. Sorry. Okay? It's just a little lesson. So we know that you can push strings or any value into arrays, right? Does this confuse anybody? I hope not, right? What we have is a string, push, 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 and we have an array of 3 happies, right? Because happy string is just happy. We just push it 3 times into amazing array. So that's what we got. So functions aren't special, and we could push them into an array too. Look what's going on here. We have the same amazing array, it's just an empty array, but now we have this function called happy function. What happy function does is just console logs I am happy, okay? And then we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to push happy function into that array 3 times. And that's what we get. We have an array of 3 functions.
Function being
This. Like, you know when you console log just a function?
right.
You just get function in the terminal?
Like the actual.
That's just what you would see in the terminal. Any questions so far? On this? Okay. So how do we call all the functions in the array? How have we always looped through an array of values? It is the same thing. So here, we have the array of happy function, happy function, happy function here, right? And happy function just console logs I am happy. So down here, we just have a for loop. We set I equal to 0, and we loop until I is less than amazing array dot length is no longer true, and we just increment I every time, right? And then we say let element equal amazing array of I, and then we invoke element. So we get I am happy 3 times. Does this make sense? The functions are just the elements in this array. We are accessing them like we normally do elements of an array, but since it's a function, we can just invoke it, right? Yeah.
If you invoke it, you get the same as before. It's function.
If we invoke it,
If you don't invoke it, you say.
and we just
you just get a function, right?
well, if we console logged element without invoking it,
Okay.
because if we just wrote element and didn't do anything, we would just get like one undefined,
Okay.
you know? Because the console is happening when happy function is being run.
Okay.
And when happy function is being run, that means it has to be invoked. and it's being invoked here. So if we don't invoke this anymore, we see nothing in the console. You know what I mean? Is this good?
Sorry, just on that last line again, element with the parentheses.
Yeah.
Isn't that a variable?
Yes. Let element
Right, and then the next line
is equal to amazing array of I.
Mhm.
What would amazing array of I be? Evan?
Yeah, object happy function.
The happy function.
That I follow. I guess I just don't understand why on the next line it's saying we invoke the function. Like, how is the function being?
Because amazing array of I would be the function, and we set that equal to element. So then element is the function.
And then with the line over, we're actually invoking it.
And that is where we invoke it. If this wasn't here, that wouldn't happen.
Right.
We wouldn't see I am happy. You need to invoke functions to call them, right? For the code inside to run. Any other questions? So passing values into functions. We know we could pass strings or any value into a function. Logs a type, happy string, we got string, right? We threw in happy string into that function logs a type, right? So that means we can do the same thing with functions. We have function logs a type value, console log type of value, and then we have the happy function that we've been dealing with the past 3 slides, and we throw that into logs a type, and we get function. You can just throw functions into other functions, okay? Functions that take a function or return a function are called higher order functions. That's what a higher order function is. That's all it is. It's not that complicated, right? It's just a function that takes a function or returns a function, okay? And it doesn't, like...
Is that different than callback?
Hmm?
Is that different than callback?
So in this case, logs a type is the higher order function, right? And we were passing into it a callback.
But the entirety of the thing is called higher order function.
Well, logs a type is the higher order function.
Okay.
I guess, yeah, the concept would be about higher order functions, yes. Yeah. Right? Okay. So, we can pass functions into functions. Awesome. So if we want happy function to run, we have to call it, right? So here we have function, this function is called calls a function. And it takes a parameter that is called another function. And then inside of that function, another function is just being invoked. And then we have our normal happy function. And then down here, we invoke calls a function, and we pass in happy function. That means we get I'm happy. Because all calls a function is doing is invoking its parameter, right? It's just whatever's thrown in here, it's just going to invoke it. We threw a function in there, so it's invoked, and we get I am happy. Any questions on why this is happening? Why this works? And does everyone understand why happy function is running? If you have any questions, now is the time. All right. So here we have a function that's called says hi, and it takes a name. What it's going to do, it's going to console log hi, and then that name, right? Hi, whoever. Then we have says bye. It's the same thing, except we're going to say bye. So now we have this function calls with name, and it's going to take a name, and it's going to take a callback. Okay? These are just parameters. And what calls with a name is going to do is it's going to invoke callback with name. So then, on lines 13 and 14, we have calls with name invoked, and we pass in a string, Sadie, and we also say, pass in says hi, that function. Then on the next line, we say, pass in Sadie, and then the next argument, we pass in says bye, that function. So that means says hi is going to be called with Sadie, And says bye is going to be called with Sadie as well, right? So we get hi Sadie and bye Sadie. Yes.
So for line, for callbacks, invoking, yeah, that one. It's basically just invoking function or just invoking function, right? In there, so it says when you call save says hi, you don't have to put in, you don't have to call that
You-
function.
What this is doing is it's just saying it's taking this parameter and invoking it and passing in this parameter. That is all this function is doing. Calls with name has absolutely no knowledge of anything besides that. It knows it's taking two things in, and it will call the second thing with the first thing, right? Call the second thing with the first thing. That's all this thing is doing. So we're just going to pass in a string and a function both times, right? So when we call this thing, this whole thing runs, and what is it doing? It's calling says hi with Sadie, right? Does that make sense? Is everyone good on that?
Callback could be renamed anything.
Yeah. These are just parameters. You could always rename parameters whatever you want. However, those things are actually called callback, so callback would be a good name, right? You could also say func. I usually say func because it's just a function, you know? Whatever you guys want. So here, we have a function add world, and it takes a string. And it just says return string plus world, okay? It's literally what it does. Then we have calls with hello. Return add world, hello, right? Return func, hello. These are just comments. What this function is actually doing is it's just returning this func with hello. So now we are actually getting something back, okay? Let results equal calls with hello invoked with add world, okay? So calls with hello is invoked here. And add world, this function, is thrown into there, okay? So what is result going to be? We have to find out. Okay, so function, this is called, so we return func hello. Func is add world, passed in hello, add world runs, add world returns string, which is hello, with the string world, so results. So this is spat back to here, and then this is returned from here, so then you have results, which is hello world. It's like diving deep and deep to get the value. That's what we're doing here, right? We're like, okay, we have to find out what this value is because we're invoking this function. So we invoke this function and we're saying return, oh, it's parameter invoked. So we have to dive deeper into this function, right? This function is here. So we get the return value here, spits it back up. So this now becomes hello world. So we return hello world from here. So that is then stored in result. So we console.log results, and we got hello world. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Wait, so which one is access first?
What do you mean accessed?
Like when you're saying like it dives deep, like which one sort of like do you get the value?
The first thing that happens is calls with hello is run. Then while calls with hello is running, it says return func hello. That means calls with hello is put on pause because we have to find out what this function does. So now this is put on pause, and then func is run. Func happens to be add world, right? So then add world is running. Then add world returns string plus world. So that means add world is done running. And we get what this is. That is hello world here. So then, since we finally get what this is, calls with hello is now going to be done running because that's the same line as the return keyword. So we return that. So then finally, that is done running here. Then we just console log and we get that.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry. The return add world, like that's in the notes.
Yes.
How does that know that it's grabbing add world?
Because it is add world is being passed in right here.
Oh, in that situation.
Any other questions? So here we have a function that says say to all. And it takes names and it takes say with name func. So what this does is it takes a for loop and it starts I at 0 and loops until names dot length, I is less than names dot length is no longer true, and I plus plus. And what it does on each iteration, it takes names of I and it passes it in to say with name func. Okay? So we have group Jane, Jill, Pip, Mike, and a function say hello with name. Hello plus name plus exclamation point, right? So then if we say to all and we pass in that array and we pass in that function, it's going to loop through the array and call that function on each element. So we get all of that. Doesn't that sound a little familiar? Didn't I just show you something that did exactly this? For each. This is exactly what for each does, okay? It takes an array, it's called off of an array, it loops through that array, and it passes that element into that function that is also, okay? That is passed into for each. All this function, this is the higher order function, say to all. It takes an array or something iterable, and it says say with name func, right? It's just a function. It loops through this array, or starts the loop there, you know, and it just calls that function on every element. And these functions, I mean this function and this array are defined here and passed into there, where say to all is invoked. And that's why we get all of these console log statements. Any questions on this? All right. We can pass anonymous functions into another function too. So, as you can see, this is the same thing as the previous slide. However, when we call say to all, we call it with group, and then we just define the function, that same function, there. That is an anonymous function, right? There's no name. It's just function, takes parameter, and then does something. This is the same thing. This is like what I did in for each. I just made the function there, except with a fat arrow, right? Like, remove this function keyword and put the fat arrow here. It's the same thing, okay? Is everyone good on this?
If you use a fat arrow there, it'd be okay.
Yeah. Same thing. Any other questions? Just a lot of examples. So here, we have two functions, plus and minus. They both take two numbers, plus returns num1 plus num2, and minus returns num1 minus num2. Then we have a higher order function called calc. And it takes num1, then an operation func, and then num2. And it returns operation func invoked with the two numbers. So, as you can see in the console log, we see 10 plus 20, 50 minus 10. And that is what we get up here. When we call calc and pass in the 10, and then the plus, and then the 20, num1 is 10, operation func is plus, and num2 is 20. So then we return plus invoked with 10 and 20, plus return num1 plus num2. This is spat back up and is returned from here So that's why we see 30 up there. Easy, right? We see the function being invoked. We need to find out what the value is. We call this function, and it returns a function being invoked. This function is coming from its parameter. We need to find out what this value returns. We need to, okay? And we pass in this function's parameters, num1, num2, which is 10, 20, right? So then we run this function. This function returns a number plus a number. So we have our value. This return value is returned from here. So that means that operation func invoked with 10 and 20 is now equal to 30. This is no more. This is just the number 30. So then we return 30 from calc invoked way back when we called it down here. So this is no longer this. This is now 30. Does that make sense? Once JavaScript reads an invocation, it has to run the function and find out what values return. Whether we say return this, or nothing is returned and it's undefined. Something has to come out of it, okay? So yeah, and then there's for each. A function passed into another function is often called a callback. Some built-in JavaScript features use callbacks. For each is an array method, and it accepts a callback as its only argument. For each calls the callback for each element in the array. When for each calls the callback, it passes the current element as the first argument of the callback. So like here's an example real quick. This is more simple than the one I did, right? So let bridges equals Brooklyn, Golden Gate, London, right? An array of 3 strings. That's all bridges is, right? Then we say function log uppercase. What this function does, log uppercase, is it says console.log string.toUppercase, right? It takes the argument, the parameter, and it just logs what it would be uppercase, right? That's just what this function does. It takes one string. So we take that function and we put it into for each. We do bridges.forEach and we throw that function into there. Then that is what we get. Because that's what for each does. It goes through the array and it passes in those elements one at a time. I also showed you that this can be anonymous. And I also showed you that it also can take the current index. Okay? Does that make sense? Any questions?
So the string that it's accessing there is from the array bridges, right?
Yes. It is the same exact element.
Yeah.
Cool? The callback passed into for each also takes an actual second argument. Like I said, it takes the index. So as you can see, now log with index is string is at index, right? Brooklyn is at index 0, Golden Gate is at index 1, London is at index 2. This is the same thing, except now the function we're passing into for each is taking hold of that other parameter. And as you can see, it's correct, right? Because that's what for each does. It throws in the element, and it also throws in the index. You don't need to take hold of either of those, honestly. But it's just going to do that anyway, you know? Like, I can delete string, and I can delete index, and I can just console log hello. And it'll run that many times. But what for each does automatically is it's just going to throw it in for you, okay? Not too shabby. Yeah.
Sorry, were you saying that the index is automatically in there?
Yeah, that's what for each does.
Yeah, it iterates through the array, and we'll have many.
And it passes to your callback function. It passes to your function. that you put in to it, it passes in the current element and also the index. Always. But you don't need, like, if you don't put index here, like, whatever, you don't need it.
You could put anything there if you wanted to.
Well, you could, but like this would be always referenced as the index. Yeah. Also, I'm pretty sure for each takes a third optional argument as well, and it will be the entire array. Which I don't really know if you would need that, but yeah, programming is all about freedom, and you can do whatever you want. Definitely look up MDN about for each though, if you're a little bit confused on this. But essentially, it takes a function, you call it off of an array, it calls that function and passes in each element into that function. That is the gist of it. Done, okay? And it doesn't return anything, okay? It doesn't return values, okay? Good? So we talked about why functions are special, or why aren't they special, and we talked about passing functions into other functions. We talked about higher order functions, talked about callbacks, and we talked about for each. How do you guys feel now? I really don't think it's that complicated, but it is very new, I think, because you guys aren't used to throwing around functions into functions, right? You're used to throwing around arrays into functions, strings into functions. But once you get the hold of the grasp the fact that functions are another data type, it'll start to ease back. And once you get the hang of for each, it'll ease back a bit, okay? So don't stress out too much, okay? Any other questions before you all go grab some food? Or what is left? Yeah.
Would you ever do like a for each inside of a? Oh, sorry. Would you ever do a for each inside of another for each?
Off of the same array? No.
No.
Off of another array?
Yeah.
If you needed to? Maybe. It's the same thing as like looping through one array and then doing a double for loop on another array or something, you know? It's definitely not recommended though. Any other questions? All right, guys. I'll slack out pairs in like 5 minutes or so.